Hello, it's Chris of Alien Rabbit. This is on the channel, Alien Rabbit channel. Like and subscribe if you like stories, literature, art, music, etc. We're a small publishing company based in the UK, of which I'm the director of. But I wanted to talk today in this video about my story of romance and the Commieblocks, because I'm the right author of the story. I'm the person who wrote these short stories, but obviously because some of the stories are set in the East, in Russia, in the Eastern world. One thing, and I'm just sort of talking about this because I can sort of anticipate people's knee-jerk reactions before they even have them, usually, to be honest. People will be saying, or will think critically, why write about stories set in Russia, or set in that sort of set there in any way, shape or form, even if it's in a science fiction, futuristic, fantasy or satirical context, right? Because I think sometimes people can't separate reality from fiction. Obviously, I mean, I don't even know why I have to say this. If you're a writer, then you create a fiction sometimes, especially dystopian fiction, of course, so that it doesn't happen in real life. It's a warning. It's not a, it's not like I want these dystopian visions to come through. The whole point of most of that Romance in the Commieblocks collection is it's a warning of the worst case scenario of an over-reliance on technology, disconnection, alienation, and a sort of like funny commentary and satire on contemporary culture, right? Because we live in a culture where people's attention spans, and like I'm guilty of this on some level, have been reduced so much with the advent of something like TikTok and Instagram and everything else, that more complex information, like reading a book or a story or listening to an entire album even, people can struggle with that more because we've been mentally trained, in a sense, or brought up in an environment where our attention is constantly being bombarded with a lot of what is actually a lot of the time our attention is bombarded with nonsense, right? Like, I mean, if you spend any time on the internet, I mean, all the internet is essentially just a collective mind, right? Well, it isn't literally, but I mean, if you want to look at the internet in a Jungian sense, it's the collective unconscious, right? Now, where am I going with this? I'm going to just do this off the top of my head because I want to try and be like authentic and as just direct as I can be, right? So obviously, like, there's the situation in Russia and invading Ukraine. Now, I lived in Russia. I was an English teacher over there for 2 years, so wasn't really involved in politics while I was over there. I was just teaching about English, and the way I taught was essentially usually started with haikus, actually, which is a Eastern form of poetry writing, which probably most people are familiar with. It's fairly simple, 575 syllabic poem, basically. Yeah, but I'm not going to ramble on too much about that. But yeah, I do a lot of creative teaching of English because I wanted to expose the children I was working there with to the best of my culture, so that I could learn the best of their culture. And of course, like, I mean, I can't believe I even have to say this, but not many people would disagree with it even, but some ignorant people would, basically. Maybe they'll come in the comments, I don't know. Hopefully they won't. But basically, culture itself, and I've written a fair bit on this philosophically before, is an overemphasis on culture is a bad thing, I think, in a lot of respects. Like if you see culture as, you know, my culture is the best, that's terrible. I mean, what does that actually lead to in the long run? Sort of this like patriotic, nationalistic jingoism that a lot of nation states will, even the UK, I'm working in the UK now, it tires me constantly when I hear, you know, just like all the institutional crap about like, you know, like we always have to look up to the royals, blah 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 blah, all this sort of like, you know, whatever. Like I'm not particular, like I am more a Republican than I'm a royalist, but you know, I don't bear them any ill will personally, but I don't see why they exist as an institution. So that can be frequently annoying. Like when you're in a culture, like broadly, I'm speaking in terms of like a country or whatever. Like you're in that culture, and you obviously love and find other parts of it annoying. I wouldn't go so far as to say hate, because I mean, if I was going to say like personally, just for myself, I don't. There's nothing particularly about British culture that I hate. Obviously, I hate the colonial past. I hate all this, the empire that we had, which we thankfully got rid of. I think all that was nonsense. Obviously, some, you know, can argue historically like some good things came of it. It wasn't all bad, but you know, the cost, the human cost, always has to be taken into consideration, right? It was terrible things that we did, and I think any culture is as strong as if a culture cannot take criticism, basically, then it is not a culture that will improve. It's not a culture that will have a way of internal critic, basically. So quite a lot of the stories in the romance and the Commieblocks, I was sort of thinking through that, but obviously from what I've been able to learn from a culture that I'm actually an alien to. I mean, I lived there for 2 years, so I wasn't. You know, I'm not Russian. Like, yeah, poнимаю по-русски a bit, but like I'm not. I am not Russian. I was an alien in Moscow when I was living there. I wasn't really integrated, so in a lot of ways I was wandering through an alien world in some respects. Like, I mean, I had the very basic fundamentals of language I could even use, so there was just exposure to another culture. Anyway, where am I going with this? I don't want it to be too long. So yeah, obviously, like in this, I just wanted to address this because, like, I think some people may see the book that I've made here and think, why would you do this at this time? There is one story, The Silver Lining, which is explicitly about, you know, a war, basically, or a conflict. It's completely exaggerated, obviously. It's like, and you know, it's a complete exaggeration of a like, sort of empire versus like colonial empire versus a sort of fascist, even more, you know, terrible force in the world, which in the example of The Silver Lining is a fascistic, technocratic, transhumanist in the most horrible way ever military state, right? But again, like in that story, I am sort of showing that just the futileness of that, right? You got the empire. There's this in the story. There's this sort of like colonial British power, basically colonizing space. They are sort of quasi. They're still like socialistic, but essentially it's like a quasi-Marxist, spacefaring British colonizers basically just colonize planets in space. And then you've got this. I mean, in some ways, it's a bit maybe. I don't know. It's obviously fantastical, right? And I just had a lot of things going in my head in terms of I was like, because I did actually write that story not long after the war had started. So I thought, how can I deal with this? Also, I've got to write from my own knowledge, my own cultural knowledge, but then also mix it in with other, you know, knowledge. Because knowledge, basically, you don't get real in-depth knowledge of anything unless you really spend time reading, researching, and you know, doing a deep dive on that stuff, right? Especially as a writer, this is well important because, you know, you have to really find out about the sort of politics, environment, like the political environment, also the personalities is obviously very important in the stories. Anyway, look, I'm going off track a bit now. Basically, I'm going to make this 15 minutes. I don't want to make it too long. So yeah, I don't know what, I know I'm rambling a bit in this video, but basically the main thing I wanted to address before like anybody might have any criticism of the book is romance in the Commieblocks. So obviously that's quite, some of the people might find that provocative, but like, obviously like romance occurs in Commieblocks. Commieblocks are these flats in Russia which are like, you know, just from the old communist regime. They're almost like something of the past. It's like a reminder of this, but then, you know, most people live in those Commieblocks in Russia, like still, like they're just mass sort of like, they tackle this in the ant-hill revolutionary. People are still in there having romance, having love, sharing things with each other, helping each other out. In a lot of ways it's a allusion to how people come together in harsh environments, right? And that's essentially what the entire collection is about. I mean, there are obviously, like, I've tried to introduce a little bit more of a sort of edgy rock and roll, not even rock and roll, it's the wrong word, but edgy sort of element to some of them. Like, I enjoy writing edgy fiction, so I have one of the stories is about sex addicts, basically, who's just living a meaningless, sort of empty life, having lots of physical, like sex, right, but is also, yeah, just a bit misogynistic, terrible human being, by any reading of that story, right? But then also there's another story like Conversations at the Piano Plaza is again set in a wartime environment, and that's about how creativity, which is a form of culture obviously, or an expression of people that exist in culture, brings people together in the toughest moments in history. And wow, I mean, this is obviously stating the obvious, right? Like, if you just look at musical history, well, even in Russia's history, there's one of the favourite stories I've ever heard about, like in the Second World War, was the story of Shostakovich and his Leningrad Symphony, which is also one of my favourite pieces of music by him, the Seventh. And they played that piece of music, the Soviets did, in Leningrad while it was under siege. I was reading a book about this at the time as well, by M.T. Anderson, who's a very good author. I read his book actually a long time ago, Feed. It was quite an influence, inspiring when I read it, but anyway, I digress. Like, so basically, yeah, so Shostakovich, a Russian composer, very complicated relationship with power actually as well in the Soviet Union during the time of when Stalin was in power. He was basically, some people I think in Russia even called him a holy fool sort of figure, but I mean, I'm not going to go into that. Holy fool's basically like a sort of hermit, but it wasn't really, because he was a musical, cultural figure, but I don't know. Anyway, I digress. Anyway, what am I saying here? Basically, obviously, you can write a story in any environment, or any setting. Obviously, if you're writing, especially during a quite tense time in terms of politics, you have to approach these things quite carefully, which I've tried to do in this collection of stories. I should probably just advertise it now, I guess. So it's available as a audiobook on Spotify and Audible, as well as in print edition and ebook on Amazon. You can just get it there. It's available. It's already sold a few copies. Like, obviously, always good to sell more if you're interested in reading something that is challenging, but there's humorous moments in it as well. It's like I describe it as it's almost like an absurdist collection of stories, really. Like, absurdism's probably, if I had to say that I live by any belief in the world, then it would be, absurdism, basically. So there's that element in the stories. There is also a bit of a technological dystopian, like a Black Mirror sort of influence, definitely. Always admired Charlie Brooker. I think he's a great writer. I also used to geek nerd alert, but I used to be obsessed with his column in PC Zone, Sick Notes, and I can definitely say there is, probably personality-wise, he's even probably, had a bit of an effect on me. I'm a bit of a misanthrope for sure. Like, I don't like being a misanthrope, and there is a limit to that, obviously. I do have to find sometimes the sort of silver lining of world events, politics, and how shit the world feels like it's going sometimes. But sometimes that can be difficult as well. Hence, escaping into fantasy sometimes and video games and everything else. But everybody does that, especially now in this world, because there's lots to escape from, right? It's a terrible time. Anyway, I'll leave this video here. I just wanted to sort of have a bit more of a stream of consciousness on just sort of preempting criticisms some people may have about writing about a culture that I'm fairly familiar with, and I know a fair amount of, and I know people from that culture as well, but also at a time when there is a actual border conflict between that nation and another nation, obviously I'm not particularly about sides in this conflict, but obviously the Ukrainians are in the right by defending their territory, right? That's obvious, right? And I know, again, this is no political statement. I'm just saying that, in my view, it's only my view, I think obviously the Ukrainians have been invaded, so they have to do something. They can't just run away, otherwise, again, it's a territorial dispute. I'm not that, I know a fair bit about the politics of the area, but I'm not a political expert, so my opinion on that matter isn't that valid. But obviously, I do support the Ukrainians in that conflict. I think they need to, in one way or the other, obviously it needs to be resolved. Obviously, it's always going to be around the negotiating table, right? Of course it is. It's not going to be. There has to be a negotiated peace somehow. And I could do a whole other video about Putin and just actual cynical terribleness of his regime, and just the way they manipulate the information space. I know tons about that. But yeah, I have to also be. Well, no, I don't have to be careful. I don't care. I hate him. He's an arsehole. He's just another. Yeah, he's just a terrible human being. But I don't think he'll be in power much longer, so I don't really have to fear him, right? He's just a man. So yeah, he might be ex-KGB and all that, but and what? Anyway, I've rambled way too long. I said I was going to make this 15 minutes, made it 17. Yeah, like and subscribe obviously to this channel. Leave any comments down below. I would really be interested in if people have any thought out opinions, if you're speaking from a place of some knowledge at least, or if you've read the book, if you have any thoughts on how I've dealt with that aspect of what is quite a difficult subject to obviously deal with at this time, please leave them below. Yeah, I've gone on for way too long now, talking about this for a long time. Just in a round bit of closing bit of news. I have been working quite hard actually. No, I've not updated the channel that much recently, but I have actually, because I've been writing, so I've been working on the novella, the prequel to the Maximo story, The Eternal Ship, which was my first novella. So I've been working quite diligently on that, which is about just under halfway of the first draft. So that's what, 8,000, 9,000 words or so now, I think. I want to try and make it mid-24 if I can. Obviously I need to sketch out the first draft and then build upon that one as I go along. It's going fairly well. City of the Damned I've been working on pretty diligently as well, for the last, few months really. Well, if you watch the channel, you'll see on the live stream, I've just been working on that for several hours quite frequently. And it is getting there. It's more just a case of refactoring and sort of improving bits and bobs of the story, and obviously then I have to go through, and because I do all the work myself in terms of the programmatic elements, programming, the branch development, the story writing, it's taken quite a while, but it's getting there, and hopefully it'll be done in 2 months. Anyway, overall peace, obviously, and yeah, have a good one.